The 13th of June, 1958. Harlem Street was slick with rain and quiet in the way cities get when something terrible has already happened and hasn't been named yet. The storm had passed, but the water stayed, clinging to the pavement, filling the cracks, turning every streetlight into a trembling reflection. People walked faster than usual that night, not because they were late, but because instinct told them to move. Harlem had learned to listen to instinct. The umbrella lay near the curb, half open, one rib bent backward like a broken finger. It was black, heavy, expensive, not the kind sold on corners, not the kind someone forgets. Rainwater dripped from its edge, mixing with something darker that stained the fabric in uneven streaks. Blood doesn't wash clean when it has time to set. It clings. It remembers. The body was already covered when word started spreading. Not by police radios, by whispers. Someone had been taken again. Same pattern, same precision. Same calm violence that had haunted the city for years. The killer never rushed. Never panicked. Never left anything behind until now. Because this time, he left the umbrella. By sunrise, the name was already changing hands in low voices. People didn't call it evidence. They didn't call it a mistake. They called it a message. Because the umbrella didn't belong to the victim, and it didn't belong to the street. It belonged to Bumpy, Ellsworth Bumpy. Johnson wasn't a man whose property ended up abandoned by accident. In Harlem, his things didn't get lost. They got returned. Or they didn't get touched at all. His reputation was built on something stronger than fear. It was built on memory. People remembered what happened when lines were crossed. People remembered who enforced those lines. That was why the umbrella mattered more than the body. Bumpy heard about it before breakfast, not from police, not from newspapers. A man came to his door while the rain was still drying on the windowsills, the kind of man who didn't knock twice. He didn't explain. He didn't need to. He only said one sentence. "They found your umbrella." Bumpy didn't react right away. He didn't ask where. He didn't ask who. He didn't even ask about the blood. He stood still, staring at nothing, like a man replaying a memory only he could see. Because Bumpy knew that umbrella. He knew when he'd last held it. He knew who had been close enough to touch it. And most importantly, he knew what it meant for someone else to use it. The serial killer had been careful for years. He hunted on wet nights. He chose victims who wouldn't be missed quickly. He left no witnesses, no fingerprints, no weapons. The police had chased shadows while the city buried its dead quietly. People learned not to walk alone. Mothers learned new routes. Men learned to keep their heads down. The killer didn't just take a life. He stepped into another man's world and left proof behind. And that kind of arrogance only comes from believing you're untouchable. The umbrella was brought to Bumpy without ceremony, wrapped in brown paper like a delivery no one wanted to claim. When he unwrapped it, the room changed. Not because of anger, because of clarity. The blood had soaked through the inner lining, dark and tacky. The handle still held warmth from recent hands, not his. Bumpy turned it slowly, examining it the way a man examines a map. He saw the tear near the seam, the smear where someone had gripped too hard, the careless confidence of a killer who thought he was smarter than everyone else. This wasn't a threat, and it wasn't a frame. It was a challenge. Most men would have gone to the police. Some would have gone to war. Bumpy did neither. He understood something the killer didn't. Fear works best when it's personal, and power works best when it's patient. Bumpy cleaned the umbrella, not all of it, just enough. He wiped the handle. He dried the metal. He left the blood inside the lining where it couldn't be seen at a glance. Then he did something no one expected. He sent word not to the cops, not to the streets, but into the places where rumors lived the longest. Bars, back rooms, night cafes. He let it be known that the umbrella was back in circulation. Same umbrella, same rain nights, same neighborhoods. The city shifted when that whisper spread, because now the killer had a problem he'd never faced before: unpredictability. He had hunted alone. He had controlled every variable. Now, the one object tied to his crime was moving without him. Rain fell again 2 nights later. Soft, persistent. The kind of rain that feels like it's watching you. And somewhere in Harlem, a man who thought himself invisible started noticing things he'd never worried about before. Familiar streets felt wrong. Shadows lingered longer. Doors closed faster. The umbrella appeared where it shouldn't have, leaning against a wall, resting near a doorway, carried briefly by strangers who didn't know what they held. Each sighting tightened the same knot in the killer's chest, because he recognized it. He knew that umbrella better than anyone. He remembered the weight of it, the moment it slipped from his hand, the confidence he'd felt leaving it behind. That confidence was gone. What replaced it was dread. The killer began to rush. Mistakes crept in. He skipped nights he would have hunted. He doubled back on routes. He watched faces longer than necessary, and the more he watched, the more he realized something unbearable. He was being watched back. Bumpy never touched the man. Not yet. He didn't have to. The umbrella did the work for him. Every time the killer saw it, his mind filled in the rest. The consequences, the reach, the inevitability. By the end of the week, the killer stopped hunting altogether. By the end of the second week, he started asking questions. By the end of the third week, he wasn't asking anymore. He was begging, because the umbrella had stopped being evidence. It had become a promise. And Bumpy Johnson always kept his promises. For years, control was the reason he survived. He chose the nights. He chose the streets. He chose the victims. Rain covered his footsteps, and fear erased witnesses. He never rushed, never panicked, never stayed long enough to be remembered. Harlem didn't know his face, only his pattern. And patterns, when perfect, become protection. But after the 13th of June, 1958, control stopped belonging to him. It started small, almost invisible. The kind of change only the hunted notice. 2 nights after the umbrella reappeared in whispers, the killer stood under an awning on 135th Street and realized something was wrong. The rain was perfect. The hour was right. The street was nearly empty. Everything matched the formula that had kept him safe. Yet, his hands wouldn't stop sweating. His eyes kept drifting to reflections in windows, not because he saw someone, but because he expected to. That expectation was new. Across Harlem, Bumpy Johnson had done nothing loud. No bodies, no warnings, no displays of force. He didn't need spectacle. He understood that the most terrifying pressure isn't violence, it's uncertainty. And uncertainty was now pressing down on the killer from every direction. The umbrella was seen again, leaning against a closed storefront on Lenox Avenue, then folded neatly beside a bar entrance on 7th. Always black, always damaged, always unmistakable. People didn't touch it, they didn't have to. Its presence alone did the work. The message was simple and impossible to escape. You are known. The killer recognized it every time. He couldn't explain how, but he knew. The weight of it, the tear in the lining, the exact curve of the handle. This wasn't a copy. This was the same umbrella, the one he had left behind without a second thought, the one that was never supposed to come back. Each sighting carved away at his certainty. He began to doubt the streets he once mastered. He changed routes mid-walk. He abandoned hunts halfway through. Once, he followed a woman for 3 blocks before turning back, heart pounding, convinced someone else was following him. That had never happened before. The police noticed something too, though they didn't understand it yet. Murders stopped. Abruptly. No gradual cooling. No change in method. Just silence. For the first time in years, Harlem went weeks without another rain night killing. Newspapers speculated. Detectives argued. Some believed the killer had moved on. Others thought he'd died. Bumpy knew better. Fear doesn't make men disappear. It makes them sloppy. The killer began talking. Not to the police. Not to friends. To strangers. Bartenders. Cab drivers. Men who looked like they might know something. He asked careless questions wrapped in fake confidence. Questions about Bumpy Johnson, about his habits, about what happened to people who crossed him. Every question tightened the noose, because Harlem listened. And Harlem reported. Word reached Bumpy quickly. The killer's voice had changed, they said. Quieter, tighter, the calm certainty gone. He was no longer asking like a predator. He was asking like a man trapped in a room with the lights off, trying to map the walls with his hands. Bumpy still didn't move. That was the cruelest part. The umbrella appeared again, this time closer. Too close. Outside a boarding house the killer used sometimes. Not placed directly in front, but near enough to be unmistakable. Close enough to say, "We know where you breathe." That night, the killer broke his own rules. He ran, not far, just far enough to feel foolish for running at all. He ducked into an alley, pressed his back against cold brick, and waited for footsteps that never came. His breath sounded too loud in his own ears. The rain soaked his coat, and for the first time since he'd started killing, he whispered out loud, not a threat, not a curse, but a plea. "All right," he said to no one. "All right." The next day, he made his second mistake. He tried to get rid of the umbrella. Not the original, he didn't have that anymore, but the idea of it. He bought a new one. Same color, same shape. Threw it into the river like a ritual cleansing. Watched it sink, and told himself it was over. It wasn't. That night, another umbrella appeared. Same damage, same bend, same silent accusation. That was when panic set in fully. Sleep became impossible. Every sound felt deliberate. Every stranger felt placed. He stopped eating. He stopped shaving. He stopped trusting his own instincts, the very instincts that had protected him for years. And when a man stops trusting himself, he becomes desperate. The killer began leaving notes, not confessions, messages, slipped into places where he hoped they would travel upward. Notes asking for meetings, notes offering information, notes promising to stop. None were answered. Bumpy Johnson didn't negotiate with fear. He let it mature. By the fourth week, the killer wasn't hunting at all. He was hiding in plain sight, moving constantly, never staying long enough to feel safe. He checked behind him compulsively. He stared at umbrellas like they were weapons. Rain no longer comforted him, it exposed him. And then came the night he cracked completely. A soft rain fell, familiar, mocking. He stepped out briefly, thinking he could manage just a block. Just air. Just proof that he still existed outside his own terror. Halfway down the street, he saw it, the umbrella, propped carefully against a lamppost. Waiting, his knees buckled before he reached it. He didn't scream. He didn't run. He collapsed into the rain, shaking, hands over his head, words spilling out broken and useless. "I'll stop," he said. "I swear I'll stop. Just take it back." Someone was watching. He knew that now. Not police. Not shadows. Something worse. Someone patient. By morning, the police would finally get their break, not because of evidence, not because of skill, but because fear had driven a killer to expose himself. But what no report would ever fully capture was this truth. The serial killer didn't beg because he was caught. He begged because Bumpy Johnson had taught him what it felt like to be hunted. And the umbrella was still out there, waiting. The begging didn't stop the rain. It didn't erase the nights. And it didn't save him. Because there was one thing the serial killer still didn't understand. Bumpy Johnson never accepted fear as payment. By the time the man broke down in the street, whispering promises to the dark, Harlem already knew something was ending. The air felt different. Not safe or settled. Like a storm that had decided where it would land. People didn't celebrate. They waited. In Harlem, waiting was survival. The killer thought begging was the end of the game. For Bumpy, it was just the beginning. The message reached Bumpy before the sun fully rose. Not dramatic, not rushed. Just a sentence delivered quietly, the way serious news always was. "He's asking for you." Bumpy didn't smile. He didn't stand up fast. He took his time, finishing his coffee, listening to the rain tick against the window. Begging wasn't power changing hands. It was proof that power had already changed hands days ago. The killer was brought in the only way Bumpy ever allowed things like this, without force. No chains, no blindfold, just two men walking slightly behind him, close enough that he could feel their breath when he slowed down. He didn't fight. He didn't argue. He kept glancing at the umbrella in Bumpy's hand like it was alive. The umbrella was clean now, almost elegant. The blood remained hidden inside the lining, exactly where Bumpy wanted it, out of sight, impossible to forget. They stopped in a quiet room above a closed storefront. No police, no witnesses. Just silence thick enough to feel like pressure on the ears. The killer stood shaking, clothes damp, eyes sunken from weeks without sleep. This wasn't the confident man who had hunted in the rain. This was someone hollowed out by anticipation. Bumpy entered last. The room went still. The killer's knees buckled immediately. He didn't wait for permission. He dropped, palms flat on the floor, forehead touching wood like a prayer. His voice cracked before words could even form. "I didn't know," he said. "I swear I didn't know it was yours." That was the moment Bumpy finally spoke. "It doesn't matter," he said calmly. Those 3 words did more damage than shouting ever could. The killer looked up, confused, desperate, searching Bumpy's face for anger, something he could react to. But there was none, just certainty. The killer started talking fast. Names, dates, streets, confessions spilling out over each other, each one offered like a coin meant to buy mercy. He promised to testify, promised to disappear, promised to turn himself in, promised anything. Bumpy listened. Then he opened the umbrella. Slowly, the sound of the fabric spreading filled the room, a soft, harmless noise that made the killer flinch harder than any gunshot. Bumpy turned the umbrella so the inside faced him, so he could see the stain hidden along the seam, so he could see the proof he thought he had escaped. The killer let out a sound that wasn't a word, half sob, half gasp. That's not," he started. "You remember," Bumpy said. The man nodded violently. Bumpy stepped closer, not threatening, not loud, just close enough that the killer could smell rain and leather and fear all at once. "You left this," Bumpy continued. "You thought it would stay where you dropped it. You thought nobody would pick it up." The killer shook his head, tears streaking down his face. "I didn't mean I didn't think." "That's the problem," Bumpy said. "You didn't think about who lives here." Silence returned, heavy, crushing. Bumpy didn't hurt him. He didn't need to. The punishment had already happened. The killer had lived for years, making people feel small, powerless, hunted. Now every second of his life felt exactly the same. "You're going to walk into the police station," Bumpy said. "You're going to tell them everything, every name, every night, every place." The killer nodded desperately. "And if you lie," Bumpy added softly, "this umbrella goes back outside." That was when the man broke completely. He grabbed at Bumpy's shoes, crying openly now, voice gone raw. "Please," he begged. "Please don't let it come back. I can't see it anymore. I can't." Bumpy stepped back. The umbrella snapped shut. That sound ended the conversation. The killer turned himself in before noon. Full confession. No resistance. No lawyer. The newspapers called it a miracle. The police called it luck. The city knew better. The murders stopped. The rain kept falling. But people walked home again. Mothers loosened their grip on their children's hands. Harlem breathed, not because justice had been served, but because balance had been restored. The umbrella was never seen again. Some say Bumpy burned it. Some say he threw it into the river. Others believe he kept it, tucked away, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Because the most terrifying thing about that umbrella was never the blood. It was what Bumpy Johnson proved with it, that even monsters can be taught fear. And once they learn it, they never forget. Harlem didn't cheer when the arrest became official. There were no celebrations, no speeches, no sense of victory the way outsiders imagine justice should feel. What Harlem felt, instead, was something quieter and heavier. Relief mixed with exhaustion. Like a city that had been holding its breath for years and finally remembered how to exhale. The newspapers told the story, cleanly. A disturbed man, a confession, a trail of evidence. Case closed. What they didn't print was how fear had lived in the cracks of everyday life, long before the handcuffs clicked shut. How people planned their nights around rain. How footsteps behind you could turn a short walk into a prayer. And they didn't print what everyone in Harlem already knew. This didn't end because the system suddenly worked. It ended because a predator met a man who understood fear better than he did. In the days after the confession, people started talking not loudly, not openly, but with the careful honesty that only comes after danger passes. Shopkeepers admitted they'd seen umbrellas and said nothing. Bartenders confessed they'd recognized the killer's eyes long before they recognized his face. Neighbors spoke of nights they'd stayed awake listening, counting minutes until morning. Fear had been communal. So was the release. What shocked the city most wasn't what the killer had done. It was what he had become by the end. The man who once moved like a ghost now shook so badly in court that guards had to steady him. The same hands that once held victims still now trembled at the sound of rain against glass. He refused to look at umbrellas, not even in photographs. The courtroom heard details that made people look away. Dates, locations, patterns. Each confession peeled back another layer of horror, and yet the most unsettling part wasn't the violence. It was how ordinary it all sounded when stripped of mystery. How small the killer seemed, without control. That was the lesson Harlem absorbed quietly. Monsters shrink when they're seen clearly. Bumpy Johnson never attended the trial. He didn't need to. He already knew how it would end. His work had never been about recognition. It had been about restoration. About returning something the city had lost without realizing it, the ability to walk without scanning shadows. Still, his name floated through every conversation like an unspoken footnote. People connected dots the papers never would. They noticed how quickly the killer confessed, how complete the details were, how suddenly the fear collapsed inward on the man who had spread it outward for years. And they remembered the umbrella. It became a story parents told their children later, softened with time but sharpened by meaning. A story about how power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it moves an object instead of a body. Sometimes it lets a man destroy himself by showing him exactly what he's done. The killer was sentenced without drama. Life, no rain, no umbrella, no audience. Just a man staring forward, already living inside a prison he'd built for himself long before the bars arrived. Outside, Harlem resumed its rhythm slowly, cautiously. People tested the nights again, walked one extra block, stayed out a little later. Let the rain touch their faces without panic. Trust didn't return all at once, but it returned. And in quiet moments, people reflected on something uncomfortable. The police hadn't caught the killer when he was confident. They hadn't caught him when he was precise. They caught him when he was afraid. Fear, when reversed, becomes exposure. Years later, people would still argue about what happened to the umbrella. Stories changed depending on who told them. Some said it was destroyed. Some said it was hidden. Some swore it appeared once more, briefly, during another storm, just long enough to remind the city of what patience can do. But no one ever claimed to see it used again, because it didn't need to be. Its purpose was finished. The killer's reign hadn't ended with sirens or gunshots. It ended with dread turning inward, with a man realizing that for the first time in his life, he was not the hunter but the hunted. And Harlem learned something it never forgot. Justice doesn't always arrive wearing a badge. Sometimes it arrives quietly. Sometimes it arrives carrying an umbrella. Years passed, but the rain never sounded the same again. In Harlem, storms used to mean danger. Wet pavement meant footsteps could disappear. Umbrellas meant shadows, cover, anonymity. For a long time, rain was the killer's ally. It wrapped the streets in noise and confusion and let evil move quietly. After June 1958, rain meant something else. It meant memory. People didn't talk about the serial killer much anymore. His name faded the way names always do when fear finally loses its grip. Court records gathered dust. Headlines yellowed. New dangers arrived, as they always do in cities that never stop moving. But the umbrella never faded. It lived on in whispers, in lowered voices when storms rolled in unexpectedly. Old men mentioned it in barbershops. Women pulled their coats tighter when rain started too suddenly. Parents used the story carefully not to scare their children, but to teach them something important. That monsters don't disappear because they're strong. They disappear because they're exposed. Bumpy Johnson never claimed credit. He never told the story. He didn't need to. Harlem understood without explanation. Power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it moves silently through objects, through choices, through patience, and through restraint. That was the most shocking part of it all, not that Bumpy broke the killer, but how he did it. No public violence, no spectacle, no bodies left as warnings. Just a single decision made calmly and followed through without emotion. Bumpy turned the killer's confidence against him. He let the man live inside his own fear. By the time the killer begged, the begging wasn't about prison or punishment. It was about escape from sleepless nights, from imagined footsteps, from the constant presence of something he couldn't control anymore. The umbrella had become more than evidence. It became a mirror every time the killer saw it. He was forced to confront what he had done. Every life taken, every scream silenced, every rainy night he had believed made him invisible. The umbrella showed him the truth he had avoided for years, that nothing he did was forgotten, that nothing he did was clean. And when a predator is forced to remember, fully and endlessly, something inside him collapses. That collapse was the real ending, not the arrest, not the confession, not the sentence. The ending happened the moment the killer realized there was no place left to hide, not from Bumpy Johnson, and not from himself. Harlem carried that lesson forward. It learned that fear can be reversed. That terror doesn't always require force to be defeated. Sometimes it requires understanding the enemy better than he understands himself. Bumpy Johnson didn't just stop a killer. He changed the rules of the hunt. He showed the city that control isn't about speed or brutality. It's about timing, about knowing when to act and when to wait, about letting pressure build until escape feels impossible. That truth outlived him. Even after Bumpy was gone, even after Harlem changed, even after the streets were renamed and rebuilt, people remembered the umbrella when rain fell just right. They remembered that, once, a simple object ended something unstoppable, not with violence, but with inevitability. Because the most terrifying thing a monster can face isn't death. It's being seen clearly. And knowing there is no turning back. That's why the story survived. That's why the umbrella mattered. And that's why Harlem never forgot. If this story made you feel that shift, that quiet moment when power changes hands, remember it. Remember how fear ended. Remember who controlled it. And remember that sometimes the smallest object carries the heaviest consequence. Because long after the killer was gone, and long after the rain dried on Harlem's streets, one truth remained untouched. Once fear learns your name, it never lets you go.